Hello, darling. Human perception is limited, and there are any number of phenomena around us which we know are real but cannot directly observe. Ultraviolet and infrared light, for example, would be perceived as additional colors if our eyes and brains were set up to detect them as other creatures can. It's intriguing to imagine what impact such unseen things might have on the human mind were we suddenly able to experience them. And that is the subject of tonight's story. Please join me now, and I hope you enjoy the novel Color. He'd made a terrible mistake. Out of food and money alike, he'd instead availed himself of some party drugs a friend left in his apartment ages ago, during easier, looser times. He'd kept them stashed in his medicine cabinet for years, in an unlabeled prescription bottle, not ever really expecting to use them. But then he'd never expected his situation to become this dire. Yet with every flip of the cabinet door to retrieve his toothbrush or floss or whatever it was, he saw his face growing more and more gaunt under the harsh bathroom light, and he finally decided, what the hell? He went up to the roof to enjoy his trip. The stuff was old, yes, but it didn't let him down. It was a comfortable night, the very end of summer, and it felt good lying on his back in just his pajamas. There was a southern breeze, but he knew this was one of the last nights that would feel warm like this. Mist would soon come, and then rain, and the changing seasons. He sighed, looking up at the sky, and as the drugs kicked in, he realized he could command the clouds with his mind. Anything he imagined, a tree, a puppy, the face of Jesus, would have its form immediately assumed in the sky. He called forth a second moon and ordered the stars to dance. None of it was real, of course, but the fact that something in his mind could appear so real was part of the charm, and it was a welcome distraction from poverty, hunger, and the teetering question mark that was his future, always threatening to finally fall and crush him under its weight. He decided that he wished to see a rainbow in the night sky. What an amusing novelty, he thought, and lo, it came. But it was unusual. There were only bands of red, green, and blue, but between red and green was another color he could not identify. On the one hand, he recognized it as a primary. No combination of other colors would result in this one. And he felt like he knew the color, almost like he had known it and seen it everywhere all his life. Yet it was not brown, nor orange, nor gold, nor anything with a name. And as a painter and professional artist, color names were something with which he was unusually adept. He lay there, stunned, as the color bled out of the rainbow and seemed to overtake the sky, like a film passing over the world, shading everything. And he was ecstatic, certain that he'd achieved some higher level of observational power, only now consciously aware of a profound optic truth that humans have always perceived but never realized. Yet, even as he marveled, the color began to fade, and within the hour, not only could he no longer see it, but he struggled even to recall it, or to imagine what it could have been. And this filled him with a sense of loss, of grief, that he could not have anticipated. He needed to see it again. All the next day, and in the days that followed, he tried to distract himself with his work. He'd been in a creative slump for months, and it showed in his empty bank account, his empty refrigerator, and his thin figure. His agent held on to him, believing in him and encouraging him, as evidenced by a dozen new messages on the machine. "Just checking in," the messages said, the cheerfulness forced, the fear evident. "Keep hoping you'll say you've had a breakthrough. How are you feeling? I'm worried about you." He'd been through slumps before and pulled triumphs out of them. The last one had kept him fed and in demand for a year. But this felt different. This felt somehow like doom. Like he'd spiraled a bit too low this time, flown a bit too close to the abyss, and now, maybe, couldn't fly his way back out. It wasn't that he was too depressed, although he was that too. It was more that he'd grown too weak, too isolated, and too overdrawn to rebuild. His apartment studio, once a tasteful and fashionable showplace of objets d'art, had been stripped down to the bones to appease his creditors. Where there had once been fine Italianate furniture, there was now a mad litter of easels and canvases, a story of panic and failure written out in paper and pigment. A few works in progress were passable as the slop of an amateur, and might be enough to pay next month's rent. But most of the pieces, in his own eyes, were garbage, and the obvious detritus of a frustrated artist with no inspiration and nothing left to say or eat, and the lack of sustenance was surely doing little to help his output. He'd never been this close to the edge. Indeed, the narrow ledge outside his apartment window seemed a more sensible path forward with each passing day. He thought, if only he could capture his experience with the strange color and the exhilaration it gave him. Contacting that particular old friend for more drugs was out of the question. He wouldn't be able to afford them anyway. Outside of that, he understood color theory too well to think that he could replicate the strange color through any mixture of paints. If such were possible, the color would be known to all. Yet he was growing obsessed with the idea that perhaps he could capture the color's shadow, almost an illusion of the color, an impression of it, using typical paints, but placed aside one another in an unexpected way. He was sure there was a way to do it. Just as scientists and mathematicians developed ways of portraying four-dimensional space, something our three-dimensional minds cannot grasp. And if he could do this, then surely he would grab the attention of the viewer or buyer and keep himself from starvation and the streets for a little while longer. Then, one night, as his stomach growled, and he was increasingly aware of the chill in the air, it came to him in a dream. He truly had seen the strange color before. He'd seen it in the undulation of creatures with iridescent scales. He'd seen it in fire, where orange and blue flames met. And he'd seen it in autumn leaves, when the wind blew and the red and green and gold and brown leaves all moved as one. Fall was now descending. The gods had blessed him with perfect timing. He would go out into the woods and observe the movement of the leaves, and while he might not see the color directly, he was confident he would see its shadow, and thereby learn how to capture it in his work. Once he had this idea, continued sleep was impossible. He tossed and turned for a while, then rose early with the sun. He stood before his window, watching the red sun rise, and was momentarily shocked by his white reflection in the window, such a sad contrast to the morning's bright amber glow. He'd been so fit once, with a ruddy complexion and enviable physique. He scarcely recognized himself now, with his deep sockets and prominent ribs. But there was nothing to be done about it, not at the moment. He showered, shaved, and used the last bit of money he had to pay for fare out to the big national park. He was jittery with excited nerves in the car, periodically giggling to himself, and he was aware that the cabby kept glancing up at him. It was embarrassing, yes, but the cabby could never understand that this might be the start of something revolutionary. He was still smiling as he briskly crossed the parking lot toward the entrance to the hiking trails. He wore jeans, boots, and his favorite russet-colored sweater and tweed blazer, his thinning auburn hair parted smartly. Once he'd walked uptown in this attire, feeling vibrant and alive, his shopping in hand, confident that better things were waiting for him. He'd turned heads then. Now people looked at him, stared at him, as he passed, but not in the same way. He knew that. But he tried not to dwell on it, telling himself that it wasn't too late, that those days could come again. One woman would later tell the police, "He would have been very handsome if he wasn't so emaciated. He looked like a skeleton, and he looked crazy." He didn't necessarily have to hike far. The wind moves through the branches at the head of the trail the same as it does further on. Yet he felt instinctively that if he was to have the transformative experience he dreamed of, and truly glimpse the shadow of the mysterious color, it would be helpful to move away from other people and the distractions they present. So he began to hike, deeper and deeper into the woods. He had neither map nor compass, but the trail was marked and the path was simple. Here it would take work to get lost. He kept his eyes on the trees, stopping now and again to enjoy the air and watch the dance of the wind through the branches. A few times he thought he caught almost the shadow of the color, an instant where there was a flash of something that was neither red nor green nor gold, something resplendent, almost preternatural, for which there was no name. And this told him he was on the right path. He needed only to continue and keep observing. So he did, and as the hour grew late, he passed fewer people in jeans and light jackets, camera in hand, small dog on a leash. Instead, he met people in parkas, in 2s and 3s, tents and cookware strapped to their backs. But no matter who he met, they looked at him strangely, with something between pity and fear. He paid them no mind, his bony face locked into a wide smile, confidently focused on his mission. The gentle mist came at last, dampening his clothes, plastering his soft feathery hair to his white scalp. The cold and wet slowed him down, and he began to cut a more pitiful figure. One woman in a group of hikers almost called out to him to ask after his health, but when his head whipped around as if on a hinge, and she met his wide, frantic eyes and skull-like smile, she looked away and said nothing. All colors vanish after nightfall, of course, so when the sun sank behind the hills, he simply curled up under a tree. He was shivering, but he was used to that. By morning, when the red sun rose again, his clothes were sopping, but at least color had returned to the world. He grinned, breathing in all the shades of the wild world before him, and he kept climbing. The days went by, each wetter and colder than the one before it. He thought about turning around, going back down the mountainside to the visitor center. People there would help him, get him dry, give him something warm to eat and drink, maybe pay for his ride home, or even try to send him to a hospital. But he couldn't do that. He'd already come so far, and the colors out here were so rich in this place without people, without garbage, without noise. It was like being in the presence of the gods of color in their version of paradise. He'd seen such crimsons and golds before, yes, but only in the artificial, never in nature, and never in such abundance. And he wanted more, because only here, he knew, could a color from heaven dwell in secret. He took to using his wet jacket for a pillow, but then, one morning, he forgot to bring it with him. His toes and heels began to wear through his socks. He knew he must look a fright, and confirmation came when he stumbled upon the two elderly women camping high up in the hills, and they cried out at the sight of him. He didn't want to hurt them. He just needed their things. They had hot dogs, lunch meat, they had water, they'd made coffee. They had fresh socks that he was able to stretch over his blistered, bleeding feet. He was giggling like a child on Christmas morning as he raided their camp, trying his hardest not to think of how they screamed as they went over the cliff, or the sad crunch when they struck the rocks below. He lost track of the days. His nails were long and jagged. He stole when he could and killed when he must. He fell, stumbling down a hillside, and lost a tooth. He knew he was sick with something, perhaps flu, but the chill of the mist helped him resist the fever. One girl screamed, "Oh my God, what is it?" as he fell upon her, unarmed but for his teeth and claws, but her suffering was brief. He'd long since left the trails, somehow, somewhere. He wasn't sure when it happened exactly. He'd intended to stay on the path, thinking it would increase his odds of coming upon prey. Maybe he'd simply reached the point beyond which the trails could go. But by and by, one afternoon, he reached a precipice upon which stood a tall, thin tree covered everywhere in brilliant red leaves. Once he would have been able to identify the tree, but he could no longer focus his mind to such things. Still, the tree was beautiful, and he stood and watched it for a while. But then a great gust of wind came up from the forested valley below. The red leaves on the tree blew upward, revealing their undersides, which were deep green. And in that instant, when each leaf on the tree continually shimmered between that deep red and dusky green, he saw the imperceptible color again, just briefly, so briefly. It was not brown, it was not gold, it was something for which there is no name, and he fell to his bare, bony knees and wept, worshipping it. He crawled out onto the precipice, too weak now to run, and hugged himself against the tree. His arms were stark white, and he could see every bone and vein in his arm. He knew there was a time when he hadn't been this, but it was hard to recall it now. What mattered was that color, that magnificent color. He plucked a single leaf from the trunk of the tree, twirling it between his fingers, and his cracked, chapped mouth burst into a smile as the novel color danced before his eyes. It was his at last, for in this moment he controlled it, calling it forth from its hiding place on the spectrum of invisible things as he twirled the leaf at his whim. Then the wind came again, tearing the leaf from his hand, and he shouted in protest. But then he looked down into the valley and saw that with each rush of the wind, the entire forest underwent that same magnificent transformation, with the nameless color sweeping over everything from one mountain to the next. He had found El Dorado, the tomb of Alexander, the Northwest Passage. He knew now how to convey the majesty of this secret color that, until himself, had been known only to God, and he was ready to share it with the world. He reached down, wanting to touch the forest as if it was one of his canvases back home, one of those over which dust was already collecting in his absence, unexplained and already worrying his neighbors. In so doing, he lost his balance and began to fall toward the forest many hundreds of feet below. But he did not scream, he was not bothered. He was in the embrace of what he had sought. He would become the color. It would dye every part of him, his body, his soul, everything he was and had ever been. And when next someone discovered it, he would be there, a part of it, imprinting himself upon its shade. These were his hopes, and then, in an instant, they were true. And there was nothing more after that, not that he saw, or felt, or hoped, or was. Obsession is, to me, one of the most frightening elements of human experience, right up there with desperation. Primarily, I think, because it's not something unique to only a certain type of person. It's something all of us can feel. The only difference is in the object of our obsession and how far we're willing to follow it. You may be fortunate enough in your life to have some sort of transcendent or religious experience, but even if you do, please, employ caution. Not even the miraculous is always what it seems. I think moderation is a better way to go. And if that lack of zeal upsets the gods, well, they created us, didn't they? So they should damn well understand. Until next time, don't forget me, n'est-ce pas?